Welcome back. I'm Tyler, you're watching the channel with my fracking name on it, and welcome to the 95th installment of Last Week Lolita News. At the top of the segment, the dust has settled and results are in. Honey Bear's Cafe was a bloodbath of epic proportions. The proportions in this instance being anything other than the OP. This reporter thinks it may have something to do with that collar looking like it was cut with all the attention to detail of a chainsaw in the dark. Granted, it's still not as ugly as this apron, but that's a bar lower than my expectations for anyone who saw this water sport meets melted butter and said, let me wear that where people can see. We're not even going to talk about this blouse that looks like if yellow could just go bad, and the rest of the series is well done, give or take a confusing use of mint and a pink colorway executed so poorly I'm pretty sure that the same shade in Little Bear's Cafe is filing a cease and desist. Seriously though, I want to talk to the person who looked at this honey print and decided to go with honey baked ham, because they're either paying their designers so little that they're coming to work hungry, or this brand saw pig's ass pink and let the intrusive thoughts take the wheel. Whatever the case, everything's sold straight out except for the OP and pink socks, making this a clean sweep just profitable enough to offset the fact that this lampshade is going to sit in stock until Jesus returns to Earth and slaps its creator right across the face. Meanwhile, as that about wraps up new release news, mainly due to the fact that Japan recently finished their Obon festival in which they were too busy paying respect to their dead to pump out princess dresses for the silly outfit community, we turn towards Last Week Lolita News' next special segment. Welcome to the future trends of Lolita fashion. I'm going to forecast them as accurately as possible, and the first out the gate for the next part of 2023 is tiny hats making a resurgence. While this will initially be done out of spite for what I said about them a few videos ago, it will gain legitimate traction among those unaware of the joke. Brands will ignore it entirely unless it takes off in China, and all in all, this community will endure a short but agonizing stint of itty-bitty top hats, micro-derby abominations, and fascinators ironically dull enough to render the entire field of anesthesiology pointless. This will turn it into a cottage industry for people whose kink is counting backwards before blacking out, and the Lolita community will eventually be held partially liable in a class action suit, which will halt the abuse of poorly scaled head coverings and return us to what the Lord intended, bows large enough to cause sufficient drag in a windstorm, and/or bonnets that would have you swept cleanly across county lines. Which brings us to our second prediction of the evening. Angelic Pretty will begin releasing one pieces with shirring consistently. I just realized that I mixed that one up with my list of things that will only happen in an alternative timeline where there is a god. What I meant to say is that the next trend is to simply remove several ribs via elective surgery and mail them directly to AP's head office. This is to convince them that not everyone is the height of a countertop. Some of us were made to fetch things on the top shelf, and I for one am tired of having to pass on every OP cut regardless of how cute it is, because the waistline would sit right below my tits, compress my lung capacity, and provide me exactly 5 minutes of suffering before I buy the entire farm. It's probably the only thing I could afford in this housing market anyway, but my limited time on this planet aside, the third trend coming up is the replacement of rings with knuckle dusters. This is primarily to fend off the roving pillagers after the downfall of capitalism. Apparently the people with the anime profile pictures didn't have time between their infighting to agree on what to do when the major avenues of trade and industry collapsed, and it becomes an every pony for themselves level fiasco in which those who watch too many disaster movies act accordingly, those who actually prepared for this already bought land upstate, and sweet Lolitas roam the streets in search of scraps, occasionally engaging in a light bit of chase the cosplayer through the abandoned Hobby Lobby for fun and profit. Cosplayers have notoriously bad knees from all the hours they spend kneeling over their projects. This will slow them down sufficiently and provide the Lolita community with enough spare fabric to keep the fashion going until such time as the sun deigns to explode. Also, it is my belief that the aforementioned knuckle dusters will be available in a variety of colors, and that AP brand ones will still manage to fit only one of your fingers. Which takes us to our fourth upcoming trend. Meetups will hold blood rituals in which sweet Lolitas will offer up the life liquid of their opponents in hopes of summoning a Milky Chan the Fawn JSK from the abyss. Gothic Lolitas will provide backup chants and support while mourning their favorite brand's descent into a mid-tier t-shirt factory. And classic Lolitas will have gone extinct entirely, presumably after the global temperatures exceed 110 on average, killing the cotton crop, resulting in the Clooney lace wars, and turning bingo halls into hotspots of carnage, to the extent that they're still finding knitting needles in places knitting needles have no business being. The occasional ritual will also be held in service of a Milky Chan MTO, but the practitioner's efforts will be regarded as absurd even among those who believe in Santa. At which point I will tell tell them, look, I'm not wrist deep in the remains of the Belgian Lolita mafia not to at least try, and proceed to conduct some arcane chicanery so potent we either get the MTO we asked for, or I rip a new orifice in the time-space continuum. Details of whether or not I'm detained afterwards get a little hazy, but it's a risk I'm willing to take to get this thing in the white and brown colorways. And moving on, the final trend for the evening is that we're all going to simply enjoy this fashion to the best of our ability with the little time we're allotted on this planet. I'm seeing waves and waves of people discovering that cringe is dead and the absurdity of our global situation killed it, and thus the community as a whole will usher in a time of abundance in both spirit and new appreciation for having been born in an era when dressing like dopamine-seeking behavior didn't result in a drive-by lobotomy. The age of the Barbie movie will guide us all to the true joy that can only be found in the absurd. Simple pleasures will appear sweeter in the face of struggles both unique and shared. For some, this will mean simply being further buoyed by the wave. For others, this will mean snorting salt water up your nose until you either learn how to swim or someone takes enough pity on you to shove a pool noodle in your direction. At which point, you will have to decide on whether to continue residing in the emotional ditch that you've been kicked into, or regain the spark of what you used to enjoy in life, even if you have to drag your exhausted psyche around like a pet rock. A pet rock that I suggest you name Projectile, because you're going to need to hurl it at anything that gets between you and progressing your will to live beyond ephemeral flight risk. And if you keep that up long enough, one day you will brush the dust off what used to light up your life. Lay hands on what used to just be distant dreams in your youth, and in a moment that feels so much like returning to a home in which you're loved, the shades of gray you've been living with will lift, and you will be reminded exactly why you've hung on for so long. The little things that make you glad will be sitting before you at the intersection between the dazzling and the mundane, and that will be enough. Not enough to solve all your problems or turn what can be an incredibly hostile world into one that clears your path, but enough to weather the cold nights of your soul, wrapping you up in a familiar coat, warm and comforting in ways that will get you through until dawn comes again. Because the little pleasures in life are what keeps us going. It is not a betrayal of your struggles to acknowledge what makes you happy. And if you would show yourself even an ounce of the kindness with which you handle the cruelties inflicted on those you care for, I think you'd give that seed of hope in you some room to grow. I'm going to get off my soapbox now before someone kicks it out from under me. I have conveniently run out of words that won't get me blacklisted. And in case you forgot, due to my momentary flirtation with a split personality, this has been Tyler. You've been watching the channel with my fracking name on it. I'd like to thank my patrons for sitting through this despite every indicator that they should flee. And should you like to join their number, you can head over to patreon.com/lastweeklolitanews for more content that I don't recommend you watch unless you're being held at Parasol Point and clearly under some kind of duress. I will now be eating ramen noodle flavor packets to restore my levels of salt. Thanks again, guys, and I'll catch you next time.